The Grand Hall of the Galactic Coalition Academy sparkled with an array of bioluminescent lights, each designed to accommodate the varied visual spectrums of its diverse student body. Cadet Xylith's crystalline form refracted the ambient light as she settled into her seat, her lattice structure vibrating with anticipation. Beside her, Crafther's compound eyes shifted nervously, all 12 of his sensory appendages twitching in sync. "Is it true what they say?" Crafther's translator hummed softly. "That he single-handedly held the line at New Gibraltar?" Xylith's crystalline surface rippled with excitement. "Admiral Wellington, I heard he survived 3 direct hits from plasma cannons and kept fighting, but that's impossible, right? Even for a human." Their conversation hushed as Admiral Marcus Wellington strode onto the stage. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the Academy's 1.2 standard gravity setting. Unlike the more elaborate environmental suits worn by many species, he wore only the standard coalition dress uniform. His dark skin bore a network of scars that caught the light, and his left eye had been replaced with a cybernetic implant that glowed a subtle blue. "Distinguished faculty, honored cadets," Wellington's voice carried across the hall without technological assistance, another reminder of humanity's natural adaptations to their high-gravity homeworld. "I'm not here to recite military doctrine or review tactical protocols. I'm here to help you understand why the Galactic Coalition chose Earth as its primary military training ground, despite it being classified as a Deathworld." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Earth's classification as a Class 12 Deathworld had been controversial, with many species arguing that no sentient life could evolve in such conditions. Yet humans had not only survived but thrived there. "First," Wellington continued, "let me dispel some myths. Humans aren't invincible, we're not superhuman, we're simply the product of a world that never stopped trying to kill us." He pressed a button, and a holographic image of Earth appeared above the stage. "This is Earth, though we sometimes called it Hell's Paradise." The image zoomed in on various regions, showing raging wildfires, devastating storms, and predators that made even the battle-hardened alien cadets flinch. "Our world has regions where the temperature swings 60 degrees in a single day. We have microorganisms so aggressive they can devour other life forms in hours. Our oceans contain creatures that could swallow some of your species' transport ships whole." Xylith's crystalline structure vibrated with disbelief. Her own homeworld maintained a constant temperature of 302 Kelvin, with variations of more than 2 degrees being considered a national emergency. "But here's what makes humans unique," Wellington's cybernetic eye pulsed as he surveyed the audience. "We didn't just survive these conditions, we learned to weaponize them." He gestured, and the hologram changed to show human historical footage. Children playing in snow, then swimming in tropical waters. Athletes pushing their bodies to extremes. Explorers venturing into the most hostile environments. Where most species evolve to find their niche and stay there, we evolve to adapt to any niche. We can survive in temperatures that would freeze the blood of some species and in heat that would melt others. We can break our bodies and heal stronger. We can go without sleep for days, survive on minimal food and water, and keep fighting long after our bodies tell us to stop. Crafther raised an appendage. "But Admiral, surely these are exaggerations, the stories about humans continuing to fight after sustaining mortal wounds." Wellington's laugh held no humor. "During the Battle of New Gibraltar, I took a plasma bolt to the chest. By any reasonable medical standard, I should have been dead. Instead, I sealed the wound with emergency foam and commanded the defense for another 14 hours. He opened his uniform jacket, revealing a massive scar that covered most of his torso. "This is what humans call running on adrenaline. To us, it's natural. To the rest of the galaxy, it's terrifying." The hall had grown so quiet that Xylith could hear the subtle crystalline chimes of her own nervous movement. The Admiral's words painted a picture of a species that seemed more myth than reality, yet the evidence stood before them. "But this isn't a story about human superiority," Wellington's voice softened. "It's a warning, because everything that made us strong, everything that helped us survive Earth also makes us dangerous, not just to our enemies but to ourselves." He paused, his organic eye scanning the audience while his cybernetic one glowed steadily. "And that, cadets, is why I'm here. Because the greatest challenge humanity faces isn't surviving our death world. It's ensuring that we don't turn the rest of the galaxy into one. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft whirring of environmental suits and the gentle chiming of Xylith's crystalline form. The first lesson about humanity's true nature had begun, and it was more terrifying than any of them had imagined. Admiral Wellington's holographic display shifted to show a vast starfield, focusing on a particular system that pulsed with an angry red light. Epsilon Eridani, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of painful memories. This is where we learned that everything Earth taught us about survival would be tested on a galactic scale. The image zoomed in to show a massive space battle, frozen in time. Coalition ships, dwarfed by the enormous swarm vessels that surrounded them, were caught in a deadly dance of plasma fire and kinetic weapons. We were outnumbered 15-1, Wellington continued. The swarm had developed a new bioweapon, something they believed would finally give them an advantage over human physiology. They weren't entirely wrong. Crafter's appendages trembled as the hologram showed the bioweapon's effects. Entire ships' crews collapsing, their nervous systems overwhelmed by the swarm's chemical assault. "But humans survived?" he asked, his translator struggling to convey his mix of horror and fascination. "We did more than survive," Wellington's cybernetic eye flashed. "We adapted, just like we'd done for millions of years on Earth." He brought up new images, showing human crews donning modified environmental suits. Within 6 hours of the first attack, our medical teams had identified the weapon's mechanism. Within 12, we'd repurposed our own biological washing protocols, something we developed to deal with Earth's toxic plants, into a defense system. Xylith's crystalline form shimmed with disbelief. 6 hours? My species requires at least 30 cycles to approve emergency medical protocols. On Earth, Wellington explained, if you don't adapt quickly, you die. We evolved alongside plants that can kill with a touch, animals that can outrun our fastest vehicles, and bacteria that can dissolve metal. We learned to think fast, act faster, and worry about proper documentation later. The hologram shifted again, showing human crews moving through corridors filled with the bioweapon's green mist. Where other species had collapsed, the humans pressed forward, protected by their hastily modified equipment. But here's what truly terrified the swarm. Wellington's voice dropped lower. We didn't just survive their weapon, we weaponized it right back at them. The display showed human scientists working frantically in ships' laboratories. Our exposure to Earth's vast array of toxins gave us an intuitive understanding of chemical warfare that the swarm couldn't match. Within 24 hours, we'd modified their bioweapon to target their own neural pathways. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Even in the heat of war, such rapid weapons development was unprecedented. The swarm had made a crucial mistake, Wellington continued, packing across the stage. They assumed that because we evolved on a death world, we would be simple brutes, relying on physical strength and endurance. They didn't understand that surviving on Earth required something far more dangerous, intelligence combined with ruthless adaptability. The hologram showed the battle's turning point. Human ships launching modified torpedoes that released clouds of repurposed bioweapons. The swarm vessels, whose crews had never evolved defenses against their own weaponry, began to drift powerless in space. In 72 hours, we turned a certain defeat into a decisive victory. Not because we were stronger or more numerous, but because Earth had taught us the most important survival lesson of all. Everything that tries to kill you gives you a new weapon, if you're clever enough to use it. Xylith raised a crystalline appendage. Admiral, my species views mutation as a flaw, something to be corrected, but you speak of adaptation as if it's beneficial. Wellington smiled grimly. On Earth, mutation isn't a flaw, it's survival. Every generation of humans is slightly different from the last, always adapting, always changing. We've got DNA from viruses that tried to kill us millions of years ago still working in our cells. We don't just survive threats. We absorb them, learn from them, become stronger because of them. The hologram shifted one final time, showing the aftermath of the battle. Human ships, damaged but victorious, moving among the dead hulks of swarm vessels. The Epsilon Eridani campaign taught the galaxy two crucial lessons. Wellington's voice hardened. First, never assume that humans' physical adaptations are our only advantage. And second, never ever back us into a corner. Because what makes us truly dangerous isn't our ability to survive. It's our ability to turn survival itself into a weapon. As the hologram faded, Crowther's translator picked up worried murmurs from his fellow cadets. They had come expecting tales of human physical prowess, of strength and endurance. Instead, they were learning about something far more terrifying, a species that had turned an entire planet's worth of survival challenges into a galaxy-spanning arsenal of adaptive responses. Remember, Wellington concluded, his organic eye distant with memory, every human you meet is the product of 4 billion years of successful adaptation against everything a Deathworld could throw at us. We're not just survivors. We're the distilled essence of survival itself, wrapped in human form. And that's why the galaxy's most dangerous predators learn to fear us, not because we're stronger, but because we're better at turning their own strengths against them than they could ever imagine. Admiral Wellington's cybernetic eye dimmed momentarily, as if accessing particularly difficult memories. The hologram above the stage shifted to show a new image. Earth, surrounded by defensive platforms and warships arranged in complex geometric patterns. 3 months after Epsilon Eridani, we discovered that the swarm had found Earth's location. Wellington's voice carried a weight that made even Xylith's crystalline structure resonate with tension. They thought they'd found our weakness. Instead, they discovered why Earth being a death world wasn't just about physical challenges. It was about psychological ones. The hologram expanded to show the massive swarm fleet approaching the Sol system. Their bioorganic ships, each the size of a small moon, moved with terrible purpose toward humanity's homeworld. The swarm expected panic when they arrived with a fleet 5 times larger than anything we'd ever faced. They expected us to break. Wellington's laugh was dark. What they didn't understand was that humans don't break under pressure, we crystallize. The display shifted to show the Earth's response. Civilian ships being converted to military vessels, orbital platforms being weaponized, and the planetary defense grid lighting up with activity. On Earth, we grew up with the knowledge that death could come at any moment. A sudden earthquake, a rogue wave, a microscopic bacteria, any of these could end us without warning. This didn't make us fearful, it made us prepared. Wellington gestured, and the hologram showed vast underground complexes and orbital facilities. Every human city has disaster plans. Every settlement has emergency protocols. We don't just prepare for disaster, we expect it. Crowther raised several appendages in confusion. But Admiral, our historical records show that humans often fought among themselves. How could a species so divided unite against an external threat? Wellington's organic eye gleamed. Ah, now that's the real secret of humanity's survival. We fight among ourselves precisely because we evolved to band together against greater threats. Earth taught us that survival often means cooperating with yesterday's enemy to face tomorrow's disaster. The hologram displayed scenes from Earth's history. Former enemies working together during natural disasters, rival nations uniting against common threats, competing groups pooling resources to survive catastrophes. When the swarm arrived, they encountered something they'd never seen before, a species that thrived on crisis. Every human nation, every colony, every settlement united with a speed that shocked the galaxy. We didn't need to create emergency protocols, we'd been practicing them our entire existence. The display showed the Earth's defense in action. Civilian ships performing complex military maneuvers, industrial facilities switching to weapons production within hours, and emergency response teams deploying across the planet with practiced precision. But here's what truly terrified the swarm, Wellington continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried across the entire hall. We weren't just ready for them, we were eager for the challenge. The hologram shifted to show human ships executing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, diving through gaps in the swarm's formation that no sane pilot would attempt. Ground-based weapons fired with impossible accuracy, guided by targeting systems that had evolved from predicting earthquake patterns and tracking microscopic threats. You see, Earth didn't just make us physically resilient or mentally tough. It made us innovative in ways that other species find difficult to comprehend. When the swarm attacked Earth, they weren't just fighting soldiers. They were fighting against the accumulated survival instincts of an entire species that had turned crisis response into an art form. Xylith's crystalline surface rippled with realization. The stories about humans intentionally flying into storms to rescue others. All true, Wellington nodded. On Earth, we call them first responders, emergency services, search and rescue. Other species see them as impossibly brave or foolhardy. We see them as normal, essential. Because on Earth, running toward danger to help others isn't heroic, it's how we survived as a species. The hologram showed the battle's culmination. Human ships using the gravity wells of planets and stars in ways that should have torn them apart. Emergency crews performing repairs in hard vacuum without hesitation, and commanders making split-second decisions that turned apparent suicide missions into tactical victories. The swarm came to Earth expecting to find our weakness. Wellington's voice carried pride tinged with sadness. Instead, they found a species that had turned crisis response into genetic memory. Every human they faced was the product of countless generations who had survived by turning danger into opportunity, crisis into advantage, and fear into fuel for action. The display showed the final moments of the Earth defense, as the swarm fleet broke apart under the combined assault of military precision and civilian determination. Their bioorganic ships, for all their technological superiority, couldn't match the sheer adaptability of a species that had evolved on a world where adaptation wasn't just an advantage. It was the only way to survive. When the last swarm ship retreated, Wellington concluded, they left behind more than just debris. They left with the understanding that attacking Earth wasn't just strategically foolish, it was fundamentally impossible. Because you can't break a species that treats crisis as its natural state, that turns disaster into opportunity, and that has spent its entire existence learning to thrive in conditions that would kill most other life forms. The hologram faded, leaving the hall in contemplative silence. The alien cadets looked at their human colleagues with new understanding, finally grasping that humanity's true strength wasn't in their muscles or bones, but in their unshakable conviction that any crisis could be overcome, any disaster survived, and any threat turned into an advantage. Admiral Wellington moved to the center of the stage, his cybernetic eye casting a soft blue glow in the dimmed hall. Many species in the coalition initially saw humanity's emotional nature as a liability, he began. They couldn't understand how a species that felt so deeply, that formed such strong attachments, could survive on a Deathworld. But during the Swarm War, those same emotions proved to be our greatest weapon. The hologram flickered to life, showing scenes from various human colonies under siege. Rather than panic or surrender, the images showed communities coming together, sharing resources and organizing resistance with remarkable efficiency. The swarm's hive mind gave them perfect coordination, Wellington continued. But it also made them predictable. They couldn't understand why human civilians would risk death to save strangers, why soldiers would sacrifice themselves for their squad mates, or why our tactical decisions sometimes defied pure logic. Xylith's crystalline form vibrated with curiosity. We were taught that emotions interfere with optimal decision-making. How could they be an advantage? Wellington smiled. Imagine you're fighting an enemy that can calculate every logical move you might make. Now imagine that same enemy facing a species that will occasionally throw logic aside because something feels right, or because they're protecting someone they love, which is harder to predict. The hologram showed footage from the Battle of New Sydney, where a civilian transport pilot had crashed their ship into a swarm carrier to protect a refugee convoy. To the swarm, this made no sense. The mathematical probability of survival was zero, but to humans, the equation wasn't about survival, it was about saving others. Crafter's appendages twitched nervously, but surely such emotional decisions led to unnecessary casualties. Sometimes, Wellington acknowledged, but they also led to victories that pure logic could never achieve. During the Mars defense, a squadron of mining ships, led by Commander Yuki Tanaka, used their industrial cutting lasers to slice through swarm ships. By any military calculation, it was suicide. But Tanaka knew those civilians wouldn't survive evacuation, so she and her crew rewrote the odds. The display shifted to show the aftermath of that battle. Civilian mining vessels, modified with makeshift weapons, had carved a path through the swarm fleet, creating an escape corridor for thousands of refugees. Earth taught us something that the swarm could never understand. Wellington's voice grew passionate. Survival isn't just about being the strongest or the most logical. It's about being willing to try the impossible when the alternative is unacceptable. The hologram displayed various scenes from the war. Medics treating wounded aliens despite toxic atmospheres, engineers jury-rigging solutions that violated half a dozen physical principles, and soldiers forming unbreakable bonds across species barriers. Our emotions, which other species often saw as primitive holdovers, were forged in Earth's crucible. Fear taught us caution. Love taught us sacrifice. Anger taught us to push beyond our limits. Joy taught us what was worth fighting for. These weren't weaknesses, they were sophisticated survival tools honed over millions of years. Wellington gestured, and the hologram showed the turning point of the New Sydney battle. When the swarm attacked New Sydney, they expected to face military resistance. Instead, they faced an entire population that had inherited Earth's survival instincts. Civilians converted their homes into fortresses. Children acted as messengers through maintenance tunnels. The elderly shared survival knowledge from Earth's harshest environments. Xylith's crystalline surface reflected the holographic light in patterns of amazement. But how did you maintain organization without central control? That's another gift from Earth, Wellington explained. On a Deathworld, rigid hierarchies don't survive. We learn to be flexible, to form instant communities, to trust individual initiative while maintaining group cohesion. Every human carries this ability. It's as natural to us as breathing. The display showed human communities adapting swarm technology, creating hybrid solutions that combined Earth survival techniques with alien technology. We didn't just fight the swarm, we learned from them, adapted their own weapons, and created something new. That's what Earth taught us. Every threat is also an opportunity to evolve. Wellington's cybernetic eye pulsed as he surveyed the audience. But perhaps our greatest emotional strength was hope. On Earth, we survived ice ages, floods, plagues, and countless disasters not just because we were physically capable, but because we never stopped believing we could find a way through. The hologram showed the final phases of various battles, where human forces had snatched victory from certain defeat through combinations of desperate courage, unconventional tactics, and unshakable determination. The swarm thought they could break us by targeting our attachments, our communities, our loved ones. They didn't understand that these bonds weren't weaknesses, they were the source of our strength. Every human they faced wasn't fighting as an individual, but as part of a vast network of relationships, each one adding another layer of determination, another reason to prevail. As the holographic images faded, Wellington's voice carried across the silent hall. That's the true lesson of humanity's survival on Earth. We didn't just develop physical adaptations or technical solutions. We developed emotional and social tools that turned our apparent weaknesses into unbeatable strengths. Because on a death world, survival isn't just about the individual, it's about the connections we forge, the communities we build, and the future we refuse to surrender. The alien cadets sat in stunned silence, their various sensory organs fixed on the Admiral. They had come expecting to learn about human physical capabilities, but were instead discovering something far more profound. That humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to survive Earth's dangers, but their capacity to turn those dangers into sources of unity, innovation, and hope. Admiral Wellington stood silently for a moment, his cybernetic eye dimming to match his organic one. The hologram above him showed Earth again, but this time as seen from deep space. A blue marble wrapped in swirling white clouds, deceptively peaceful from this distance. After the swarm war, he began, many species asked why we didn't simply abandon Earth, leave the death world behind and establish ourselves on more hospitable planets. They couldn't understand why we maintained colonies there, why we kept returning to a world that seemed determined to kill us. The hologram zoomed in, showing Earth's varied landscapes, storm-racked coastlines, active volcanoes, dense jungles, and frozen tundra. Each hostile in its own way, yet each teeming with human activity. The answer is simple. Earth isn't just our homeworld, it's our teacher. Every challenge it presents makes us stronger, more adaptable, more innovative. We don't just survive there, we learn there. Crowther's appendages moved in a pattern of deep thought. Is this why the Coalition established its primary military academy on Earth? Wellington nodded. Precisely, but not for the reasons most species think. Yes, the high gravity builds physical strength. Yes, the variable climate teaches adaptability. But the real lesson Earth offers is more profound. It teaches that survival isn't about being the strongest or the most advanced, it's about being the most adaptable. The display shifted to show the Coalition's training facilities on Earth. Alien species learning to cope with rapid weather changes, varying gravity conditions, and unpredictable environments. Since opening Earth to Coalition training, we've seen remarkable changes in other species. The luminaries, he nodded toward Xylith, developed new crystalline structures that can withstand extreme temperature variations. The Nexians, he gestured to Crowther, learned to modify their hive-mind connections to operate independently when conditions demand it. Xylith's surface rippled with revelation. We always viewed our rigid structure as immutable, but training on Earth taught us that adaptation itself is strength. Exactly, Wellington smiled. Earth doesn't just challenge the body, it challenges assumptions. Every species that trains there learns that their perceived limitations are often self-imposed. The hologram showed various alien species working alongside humans in Earth's most challenging environments. Underwater research stations, volcanic observation posts, Arctic exploration teams. But perhaps Earth's most important lesson isn't about physical adaptation at all. It's about perspective. When you evolve on a world that could kill you at any moment, you learn something crucial. The universe isn't hostile or friendly, it simply is. Our job isn't to conquer it or hide from it, but to understand it and adapt to it. Wellington paced slowly across the stage. This perspective changed how we approached galactic politics. Where some species sought to terraform worlds to match their preferences, we learned to adapt ourselves to each new environment. Where others built rigid hierarchies, we created flexible systems that could evolve as circumstances changed. The display showed scenes from various coalition worlds. Humans working comfortably in environments that would kill unprotected members of their own species, sharing survival techniques with alien allies, and helping other races develop their own adaptive capabilities. The Swarm War taught the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our physical resilience, or even our adaptability. It's our ability to take the lessons of our Deathworld and share them with others. We don't just survive, we help others learn to survive. The hologram shifted one final time, showing the modern coalition, a diverse alliance of species working together, each contributing their unique strengths while learning from others. Every human you meet, Wellington's voice grew soft but intense, carries within them the accumulated survival knowledge of countless generations who faced Earth's challenges and prevailed. But more importantly, we carry the understanding that survival isn't a zero-sum game. The more we share our knowledge, the more we all benefit. He turned to face the assembled cadets directly. That's why you're here. Not just to learn how to survive on a death world, but to understand why we call Earth our home despite its dangers. Because in facing those dangers together, we become stronger than we could ever be alone. The Admiral's cybernetic eye glowed brightly as he delivered his final words. Remember this, cadets. Earth isn't just humanity's cradle, it's the galaxy's greatest classroom. Every challenge it presents, every danger it harbors, every adaptation it demands, teaches the same crucial lesson. That true strength lies not in avoiding adversity, but in learning from it, growing through it, and sharing those lessons with others. As the hologram faded and the lights returned to normal, Xylith and Crowther exchanged glances with their fellow cadets. They had come seeking to understand why humans were considered one of the galaxy's most formidable species. Instead, they had learned something far more valuable, that humanity's true gift to the galaxy wasn't their ability to survive a death world, but their willingness to help others learn from their experience. In the end, Earth's greatest legacy wasn't the humans it had forged in its crucible of evolution, but the lessons they had learned there, lessons that were now helping to shape the future of all species in the coalition.